On April 4th, 2019, the LDS Church announced that it had reversed a policy that prevented children with an LGBT parent or parents to be blessed, baptized, ordained, or otherwise have full fellowship. The Church also reversed their policy, stating that people who are part of a same-sex marriage are defined as apostates and therefore required to face church discipline. This move was largely praised by both people in and out of the Church. Some held it as an example of continuing revelation. LDS President Nelson went so far as to call it revelation upon revelation, knowledge upon knowledge. Some consider this a baby step towards making room for LGBT people and their families. Others called it a correction of a policy that should never have been formed in the first place. Some pondered if it was an Abrahamic test for the membership of the Church, a way to see who would follow the prophet and who would not, a way to separate the wheat from the tares. I find it funny that while same-sex marriage is no longer a cause for church discipline, having sex in that marriage is considered immoral and thus subject to church discipline. This policy was announced in the fall of 2015. After same-sex marriage became legal in the United States, the LDS Church top 15 leaders wrestled with what to do. They fasted, prayed, met in the temple, and sought God's guidance on the issue. After some time, the Mormon prophet, seer, and revelator Thomas S. Monson declared to the brethren the mind and will of the Lord on the matter. According to President Nelson, this was a revelation direct from God. It led to the Church's new policy regarding Mormons in same-sex marriages. The brethren stated that the Lord considered these couples apostates, who required church discipline and probable excommunication. The brethren all agreed that it was God's will, that the children of these couples be forbidden to have baby blessings, baptisms, priesthood ordinations, and other religious rites in the Church. Furthermore, any child with an LGBT parent would also face these restrictions until they turned 18 or disavowed their parent. When this policy was announced in the fall of 2015, there was much criticism from both inside and outside the Church. Critics said that forbidding children to participate in the church rituals that their family members and peers were allowed to was cruel. Critics said that it was unchristlike to forbid little children to come into Christ through baptism and infant blessings. Many of us viewed the requirement that these children would have to disavow their LGBT parent as a form of spiritual abuse. When this policy was announced, it angered me, even though I had left the church many years before. I have friends who were in the situation where the man was gay, but he married a woman in the temple. They had kids and tried to make their families work in the way that the church had taught them their whole lives that they should. Both of these men, when they got into their mid-30s, faced emotional and mental pressures and were unable to live the lie anymore. They felt like they needed to either divorce their wives and live as a gay man or commit suicide. Fortunately, they did the former. These families had sons, some of whom had been ordained to the Mormon priesthood and some that were still too young. One had a child who had been baptized and one who was too young. These younger children could not participate in the church like their older siblings, even though they had the same gay parent. This caused a lot of stress and heartache for those children and those families. These children loved their dad. They loved being a part of the church, but they were put in a position where they had to either disavow their parent or be ostracized from their faith community. According to President Oaks, the reversal in policy was intended to help the affected families and to reduce the hate and contention so common today. Considering that it was the church that created this problem that affected these families, considering that it was the church that was spreading the hate and contention, I find his remarks to be disingenuous. I think he reversed the policy because it made the church look hateful and bigoted. I think he did it because this was a PR problem. If you are a believer who follows the prophet, you have to believe that God dictated this policy in 2015. Since God can see into the future, he had to know the damage, pain, and heartache it would cause before he revealed this to the brethren. Therefore, you also have to then believe that God knew it would make the church look terrible. He knew it would fail and that he would have to reverse it 3.5 years later. Why would God be this cruel and short-sighted? You may say it was a test to see who would follow the prophet, even when the prophet was clearly wrong, but this poses two problems. First is that God was willing to let people suffer, families and relationships split and end, and reportedly let some people take their own life just to see who would follow the prophet blindly. Surely there had to be a better way to do that without causing so much damage. Second, this idea supposes that God does not want us to formulate our own morality and think for ourselves. It means that God wants us to act as automatons who follow orders without thinking or having empathy for others. Given that the idea of the plan of salvation is for humanity to learn these skills, progress towards godhood, instead of having to be commanded in all things, This is the most anti-Mormon position I think one can have. I think this was a test. I don't think it was a test from God, the brethren, or anyone else. I think this was a test of the morality, empathy, and intellectual honesty of Mormons. Members of the church had an opportunity to exercise their free agency and morality. Those who followed the brethren blindly and supported or did not object to a clearly cruel and false revelation failed. They failed to show any empathy for their fellow man. They failed to exercise any basic moral code. They failed to follow the teachings of Jesus, and they failed to think for themselves. Those who objected passed this test. They exercised their individual morality and passed. They exercised the right to think for themselves and passed. Those of us who decided to stand for something and object were proven right. This is nothing new when it comes to Mormonism. Those who objected to the racist doctrines in the past were proven right. Those who objected to polygamy were proven right. In all of these cases, the prophets and believers who created, supported, enabled, or defended these hateful and evil doctrines and revelations were wrong. Those who objected to those hateful policies were proven right. I don't know what anyone else needs in order to see that the leaders of the LDS Church do not and have never had any special connection with the divine. They are old men who project their own bigotry and hate onto the idea of God and then infect the faithful with that prejudice. Their revelations have never been the source of any special knowledge or morality that was absent in the world. Their positions have failed time after time, and the church has been forced, dragging and screaming, to follow the standards of the world rather than create them. How can the LDS Church claim it has any moral superiority when it has difficulty catching up with what ordinary people regard as common moral and ethical sense? The church has proclaimed wicked and evil doctrines that have destroyed lives, and yet they never apologize for or admit any wrongdoing. Why should we listen to anything these false prophets have to say?